And we also learned that a number of other leagues had already done the same thing, which is taken the Utah League, looked at their position and concurred with them, including Connecticut, Maryland, Delaware, New York, and a number of other leagues. So we used the Utah report as a basis. We gathered some more information because a lot has changed between 2016 and 2020. We kind of put that together as an addendum, and then we went about distributing that among our league members. So before I go further, I just also wanted to clarify terminology because there's lots of words out there and it can be confusing. So medical aid in dying, as I said, is the name of the clinical practice. Death with dignity is the name of the law in Oregon, in Washington, in other places. In California and Colorado, the name of the law is the End-of-Life Option Act, which is the name of the proposed law here in Minnesota. Other states have other names for their laws. Our Care, Our Choice Act is one. So just to clarify that all these different names of laws are different, but the clinical practice is medical aid in dying. So just to clarify that. And you'll also hear physician-assisted suicide, which is inaccurate terminology. I think it still lingers from the past, but as we go through, we'll talk more about why that is inaccurate. So the teal colored states, the 10 states plus DC, have already authorized medical aid in dying. And like I said, they each have a different name for their law. The dark blue states have introduced legislation, and there are probably a few more since then. I know Virginia has. So there's a number of others that we would add to this. And then the squares are areas states where they have local grassroots community supporters working to pass the legislation. And just to kind of run through this and show you the history of it, the first law was passed in Oregon. It actually was passed by ballot in 1994 and was not enacted until 97 and had gone through a number of challenges, including a Supreme Court challenge, which, as if people remember, was written by Justice, oh gosh, her name's, I'm having a name fart, the first woman Supreme Court Justice. Anyway, she wrote it'll come to me. She wrote the opinion that said medical aid in dying is not protected nor prohibited in the Constitution, and this would be a states' rights issue. So it was sent back to the states. In 2009, Washington State became the second state to pass it, and Montana that year also found in a court ruling that it was not prohibited. Vermont was the first state to pass it by legislation in 2013, and then in California in 2015. And this was, some of you may recall the story of a young woman, Brittany Menard. She lived in California, had a brain tumor. Her whole family moved to Oregon in order to access the Death with Dignity law. She was in People magazine, all over the place. This was really a turning point for the movement. And when her family went back home after her death, they helped pass the California law. And that was kind of a tipping point because there has been a rapid increase in laws adopting this, or in states adopting these laws since then. Colorado adopted the law after a 2016 ballot initiative. And I just like to remind people that in 2016, remember that presidential election? One of the candidates in Colorado got 43% of the vote, and one of the candidates for president got 44% of the vote. But this ballot initiative got 68% of the vote. It was the highest vote-getting ballot initiative that year and possibly ever. I don't know if that's true, but definitely that year. Got more votes than anything else on the ballot that year. And that's just to show that this is really a nonpartisan / bipartisan issue. People on both sides of the aisle are in support. Washington, D.C. passed it in 2017 by their city council, and then Hawaii by legislation in 2018, Maine and New Jersey in 2019, and just last year, New Mexico became the 10th state. So I want to just put this in the context also of when we talk about end-of-life options, what's the scope of end-of-life options? And of course, I think the default and the first we think of as pursuing all life-sustaining treatment. And generally that will be the default unless you indicate otherwise. You can refuse life-sustaining treatment. You can also discontinue it, where you may start it and then decide to discontinue. Comfort care or hospice care is an option at the end of life once someone has stopped all curative treatment. And then VSED is an acronym for voluntary stopping eating and drinking, which is legal and happens every day, where people often think of a late stage cancer patient in hospice may say, you know, I'm just done with this. And they will stop eating and drinking and dehydrate in 7 to 10 days. And then continuous deep sedation is something that's generally available to someone who cannot speak for themselves anymore. And their healthcare agent and their care team may decide that, you know, they're just in too much discomfort, suffering, struggling to breathe, drowning in fluids, and they will provide them with a medication that will put them into a comatose state. Sometimes enough medication is needed that it will actually suppress breathing, and that happens sometimes. But often people are put into a comatose state where they will be titrated to keep them there, and then hydration, nutrition withheld, and they will then die in 7 to 10 days. And then medical aid in dying is where I put this as another one option, which is what we're going to talk about. So I'm really talking here about what's in the bill that has been proposed here in Minnesota, but it's similar to all the other laws around the country. They all have a few distinctions, but the basics are the same. You must be an adult. This does not apply to children. You must be a resident of the state. You must be terminally ill with a 6-month or less prognosis. And that is the same criteria for enrolling in hospice. And it's very common in medicine to identify patients who have about 6 months left to live. And at that point, they would be referred to hospice. That's why that number was chosen for this as well. And then they have to be mentally sound. So they need to be able to make their own healthcare decisions. They have to have an intact memory, understand the consequences, be able to communicate their wishes. All that must be in place. Again, someone with dementia in the last 6 months of life has lost the ability to speak for themselves. And then finally, they must be able to self-ingest. And I would also note that just to clarify, this is distinct from healthcare directives. So if you think about your end-of-life directive, the purpose of the directive is that it goes into effect when you can no longer speak for yourself. Medical aid in dying is only available if you can speak for yourself. So this is not something you can put in your advance directive for later. There are also, the process is also laid out in the legislation where there has to be a written request is submitted, 2 oral requests. The physician will then determine the patient's eligibility, walk through a full list of alternatives, ensure that they are acting of their own volition, discuss hospice, provide them with a referral if they're not enrolled and would like to have a hospice consult. And really that is the gold standard. That is not required, but strongly, strongly recommended. And you'll see that most patients, in fact, who use medical aid in dying are in fact enrolled in hospice. You'll also see I put /NP on this slide. That's one of the distinctions between Minnesota's law and other states. The only state that has enacted this law allowing advanced practice nurses or nurse practitioners to participate is New Mexico. All the other states limit it to physicians. However, there are many states, including Minnesota, where nurse practitioners have prescribing and independent practice authority. And so for those who do, they are included as a possible provider. And I think originally that was done because rural states wanted to increase access in rural areas. And so our state has determined that some nurse practitioners function equivalent to physicians, and so they have equivalent authority under this law. And then after going through that process, they're referred to a second called the consulting physician, who will go through the same steps again with the patient, determine eligibility, take an oral request and document it, go through the list of alternatives, be sure they're acting of their own volition. If there's any question from either physician about the mental status of the individual, they would be referred to a mental health specialist. So I would say most of the time, doctors will know. I mean, every day physicians are constantly assessing people's mental status because they have to give informed consent for medical procedures. And so doctors, it's usually very clear when a patient has capacity, and it's often clear when they don't have capacity. So it's sometimes in those gray areas where there may be some question that a mental health consult would be recommended and helpful. A few of the safeguards that are in the bill that are in all the other bills is number one, no health professional and no institution is required to participate. So as with, for example, abortion or a gender reassignment surgery, if an individual does not want to participate, they don't have to. And no institution is required to make this available. Liability protection is offered to any health professional who follows the steps. So as long as you go in compliance with this law, you're protected from any civil or criminal or civil liability. And then clearly states in the law, in every other state and in the Minnesota bill, that this is not for any purposes suicide, assisted suicide, mercy killing, or homicide under the law. So legally, it is not assisted suicide, which is one important reason that we stop calling it that when we're talking about the very specific clinical practice of medical aid in dying. So I wanted to go through some of the material that the League pulled together for our review of this. We did we added supplemental information to the Utah study, three sections primarily. One is we updated the report, the data on year-end reports. So every state where this is authorized puts out an annual report, which shows how many people used the law that year, what were their diagnoses, how many physicians participated, cumulative year-over-year comparisons, and every state, just about every state has these annual reports. So Oregon's is A, the most comprehensive, they have the most data that they collect, and B, they've been doing it for 22 years. So I just referred folks to the Oregon report, although you can always go and dig into and find all the other state reports as well. And then we also updated the medical association positions because many of those have changed since 2016 when the Utah report came out. And then we added some survey data from Minnesota that was available from 2016. So just to quickly review the Oregon data this is from the 2020 report, which covers up through 2019. And there have been 2 more reports since then. Overall, for the 22 years the law was in effect, just under 3,000 individuals received a prescription and just under 2,000 ingested the medication. And this is 2 to 1. So about 2 out of 3 people who got the prescription actually used it. About 1 out of 3 did not. We don't know why, it's not indicated why, but I think it's important to note because there's no requirement that once somebody goes through this process and receives a prescription, they don't have to they can change their mind at any time. These folks may have died of something else. They may have just decided they didn't want to use it. We don't know, but we do know that pretty consistent across the states, it's about 2 out of 3. Also, the diagnoses among people who utilize this is very consistent across the states. The number 1 is cancer. A wide variety of cancers, but 66 to 75% are cancer diagnoses. The next biggest group is generally neurodegenerative disorders, including ALS, primarily ALS. And then cardiovascular and lung disease is another category. And what's important to note about this is that these are the kinds of diseases where the trajectory of the illness is predictable. For example, when cancer patients are in hospice setting, as they begin to lose their capacities and lose their functionality, that is a step closer toward death. Ditto with the neurodegenerative diseases, they're progressing toward death. There are other diseases like certain heart diseases where, people will have an incident and then they'll bounce back, and then they'll have another episode and they'll bounce back. And those are less predictable courses, and those are not the kind of diagnoses you'll see with people choosing this option. In Oregon, 95% of the people were enrolled in hospice when they made this request. Enrollment in hospice is high, very high in all the states, but none quite as high as Oregon, in part because Oregon has such an advanced hospice system in their state. But it's always somewhere over 50%, often 60 to 80% of folks in hospice, which is what we want to see. And the vast majority of the folks, 92%, died at home. Then the demographics or profile of the patient is that the vast majority, again, are white. They are higher educated, they are insured. And this is again true across the states. And I think it's important the reason I point this out is that 25 years ago or more, when the first laws were being developed, there was concern that there was potential for abuse. And, if we let people take this option, it's going to be forced on the poor, the elderly, the disabled, minorities. But fast forward 22 decades, what's really more common is that it's become almost an upper middle class privilege, in part because no government insurance programs will cover it. No federal, so Medicare does not cover it. The federal portion of Medicaid does not cover it. The Veterans Administration does not cover it, and no federal government health insurance program will cover it. Most state Medicaids also do not cover it. So there are 2 or 3 states, where Oregon being the leader, where the state portion of Medicaid will actually cover the cost. Private insurers vary. Kaiser Permanente in California has a very, very well-designed program for using medical aid in dying that involves social workers and every member of their department. They have a system in place. Other insurers don't cover it. And then, so if you're government insurance that doesn't cover this, and you don't have private insurance, you're stuck paying out of pocket, which may be one reason why there's a low utilization among certain lower income groups. Just a little bit more data. That in 2019, 142 doctors in Oregon wrote the 370 prescriptions that year. And that just kind of helps show that it's not one doctor death. I mean, you'll hear people say, oh, there's going to be doctor death going around killing people. It's really become more integrated across physician practices, those who care for people at the end of life. And there's been, in 22 years in Oregon, no abuse, no physician has been disciplined. There's been no legal action. And in fact, the Oregon Disability Rights Group has had not a single complaint. So what's good to know now is that 20 years later, we have a lot of, and this is what we referred to, you'll see I referred to in the Utah report, is that there's been really no evidence of any abuse or misuse that was such a concern back in the day. And then the Oregon, if you want to go look at the Oregon report, it has lots more detailed information, for example, the medication that's used, the time to death, that kind of data is tracked there. So if you really want to dig in more deeply, you can sure do that, but I did not do that for this purpose. Oh, also the medical groups, so the organizations, the medical associations that have changed their positions. So historically, they've been opposed to what they've considered assisted suicide. However, as these laws have taken effect, more and more medical organizations have changed their view. The biggest one being the American Academy of Family Physicians, which in 2018, they dropped their opposition and are taking what is sort of a neutral but engaged neutral position, where they are involved in and giving input into the development of the laws to assure safety parameters. But they're not saying it's right or wrong, it's good or bad. They are saying, these are ethical decisions made between a doctor and a patient and their family and their spiritual advisor. And neither side is right or wrong. However, we want to be sure that there are safety parameters, and we want to be sure that doctors who participate and doctors who don't are equally protected. So that's kind of the position of engaged neutrality. Similarly, the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine has adopted that neutral stance, and the American Academy of Neurology. And you can see why these groups are the ones who are most often dealing with patients at the end of life. And then the American Nurses Association, which was also a very big change for them, they changed they had previously said it was inappropriate for nurses to participate. They don't say that anymore. They say nurses are obliged to be educated about this and not be judgmental and keep the patient's needs first. And they can also decide for themselves. And then 12, and I think we're up to 14 now, the AMA. The state medical societies, 12 of those, including the Minnesota Medical Association, have also adopted neutral stances. The AMA, I wanted to just go back to the AMA, which it didn't change its position, but what it did was reevaluate its code of medical ethics, because previously the code of medical ethics had said, this is an inappropriate, it's incompatible with a physician's role as healer. But their ethics and judicial council went back and looked at that, studied it for 3 years, and came out with a different interpretation that said, doctors on both sides have legitimate arguments. Both are concerned about the welfare of their patient. Both are equally ethical people. So you can, whether you're for or against it, you're not in violation of the code of ethics. So it's not a neutral position per se, but it is in equipoise. It's in ethical equipoise where there's not a wrong or right side. And that's a change. Then here are the data, the survey data that we had from Minnesota. This was in 2016. Survey showed 73% overall supported medical aid in dying as an option at the end of life. Democrats, Republicans, and independents, all majorities there. Greater Minnesota and the metro area, and religious denominations. And Christian was 52%, only 27% of Christians opposed, 52% supported. And if you pull out Catholics, 71% supported, while 29% opposed. And then again, in the disability community, 77% support. And I say this because often the groups that come out as strong opponents may not be actually representing the members of their communities, because when we poll the members of the communities, the support is there. And then, the Minnesota State Fair poll. That was done in 2016. I'm going to let you read the question exactly as it was written there. So 68% said yes. So going back to the Utah study, I hope you'll go back and read the Utah study. They did a very nice job of elaborating on the pros and cons, which I'm just going to list here. The pros being, this was autonomy. People should have the right to decide what happens with their own bodies. The purpose is relief of suffering, not killing themselves. It was safe. There's been no evidence of abuse. And on the other side, the arguments are morally wrong, that this is just ethically inappropriate for physicians to participate, goes against the Hippocratic Oath. It's unnecessary. Hospice, often will say hospice can relieve all suffering, and hastening death is unnecessary. And then the similar concerns that have been voiced over the years about this becoming euthanasia, where we're euthanizing people who have disabilities, or withholding treatment and instead advising poor elderly or Black people to take this option. Those are the arguments, and I encourage you to take a look at them and read them. And then our league went, after doing all of this, getting all of this information, we talked a little bit about, why should the league take a position on this? And, we do want to inform and educate people on the issues of the day, of course, but does this align somehow with our values? One was, individuals' autonomy over one's body is a particularly important issue for women. Individual privacy, religious freedom, the feeling that one religious view is the basis of the current laws, which actually make medical aid in dying a crime under the law. And equal access to healthcare, that there are other states that have this available, but people in Minnesota do not. And then just to reinforce that this is a state issue, as I said, so the League of Women Voters of US, we wouldn't look to them for a position because it's not a federal issue. State by state leagues, the state league is the level at which a policy position would be the appropriate place to develop that. So this is the exact position written by the League of Women Voters of Utah. And this is what, so we had taken all this data, which I'm sure I shared with you. If I didn't, I will again after this. We took the Utah study, our addendum, this position. You know, we talked about it in our unit meetings. We had a presentation at our Civic Buzz, and then voted to concur with this position. And then the next step being to take this to the state, because Minneapolis League is a unit, we can't act on our own. This is really a state issue. And so we took it to this, we moved for concurrence, and that was in 2020. And if you remember what happened in 2020, COVID hit and everything got canceled. So the annual meeting, council meeting that year was canceled due to COVID. So we had done some outreach to try to share this information with other leagues. We did have a couple leagues that joined with us in concurring. Golden Valley was one, and I think Plymouth Wayzata was another. But by the time, so we brought it back, you know, to the 2021 annual convention, and we had done a presentation on it just a few days before the convention to try to give delegates the opportunity to learn more. And the concurrence motion failed. It actually got the majority of the vote. It got 58% of the vote, but needed 60% in order to pass. So it did not pass. And I know some of you delegates were actually there. My assessment of it is primarily that people didn't know enough about it. They were kind of taken by surprise. They hadn't had the deep sort of dive and education about it, and they really weren't sure. And so they were not ready to vote yes on something that they needed more information about. There were other concerns raised, but in my view, that was my impression of what the main issue was. And I'll invite when I'm done here, other delegates to say what their impression was. So after convention, there was a lot of interest in bringing this back. And so we developed a committee, and Arnie's on the committee and Susan's on the committee. And our goal really was to get out there and just educate our sister leagues, because we really realized that they hadn't had the opportunity to learn about this. So that was our number one goal. And we reached out, and I think we have like 15 or 16 league presentations happening between January and March. We haven't reached every single league, but we have tried to reach every single league, and we've reached the majority of leagues, just to do exactly what I'm doing with you today, present the information. So this will be, the concurrence will come up for motion again at council on April 30th. So your Edina delegates will be in a position to say, I vote yes for concurrence, meaning Minnesota adopts the Utah position, or no, we don't. So that's sort of the action item of the day for you, or figuring this out how, you know, unless, you know, I think every league does it differently in terms of, does your delegate go there because they're supporting a position? Do they go there and they're free to vote however they want? I don't know. Every league does it a little bit differently. But this is what's going to happen on April 30th. So your Edina delegates will have the option to vote yes or no. So that's it. I'm going to stop screen sharing, and I'm going to invite the other delegates or committee members, Susan or Arnie, to make any comments and then take questions.
I can make a brief comment. Having worked as an administrator at Mayo Clinic for 32 years, I've been around, you know, medical personnel at all levels, including physicians. Mayo is a reputation as being very conservative, but I think this is a kind of an issue that sure resonates with me, and I think it resonates with you know, people who have a generous and benevolent outlook at people, especially in their end of life experiences. So I just am very enthusiastic about this.
Also, I got involved in this because the votes at convention, at council were like, no, convention. There were 2 votes there, And, you know, I got kind of hung up on the logistics of it, the first vote. And then the second vote that we had on the second day was a matter of people saying things like, no, we can't spend any time on this because we have to get busy for the 2020 election. And I could see their point, but it was sort of an issue that I felt shouldn't be put behind everything else. So that's the genesis of what I'm trying to say, is that it shouldn't be put behind everything else when it's the person that's dying and they need help.
Oh, Susan, thanks. That also reminds me that some of the other concerns that came up were, why are we getting involved in this contentious issue? Isn't it really politically volatile? And my response to that is that the league takes positions on a lot of things that end up becoming politically volatile. For example, climate change. I mean, we have positions on climate change. We have positions on gun violence prevention, and those at the political level become very divisive. So we tend to look at an issue and take a position without consideration for the political ramifications of that. So that was, we talked about that a little bit too. And the fact that, like Susan says, we have positions and priorities are not the same thing. So it may not become a priority for the league. Certainly next year, we just don't know, but to have a position enables the group to act if and when it becomes a priority. So.
Thank you. Joni asked the question about, is a supermajority required by LWV Minnesota because the position is not recommended by LWV Minnesota board? No, it is not. It's required by the bylaws. So.
And the rules for convention and the rules for council are different. I have learned so much. And this is a council year. And so the board doesn't make any recommendations in a council year. Things simply come up and all things have to pass by a two-thirds majority at a council. So it's going to have to win by 66% if it passes. And I know there's another issue that's going to come up too. I think it's guns related.
Yes.
It's different convention years. So, but we won't get into that because this is a council year.
And I'd like to say that we have just learned that we will have 9 delegates to the council, and the board will be meeting on Monday, and we'll be talking about how to get those distributed. And that, as Rebecca mentioned, the council is April 30th from 8:30 until 3, I believe, is the timing on that. That's a Saturday. And indeed, the firearms and the end-of-life options will be coming up before the council at that point. If you're interested in seeing information about council, go to LWVMN website and look at news and events, and there's a council 2022 thing there. So you can see what's on the agenda and so forth. And you can also see that we have 9 delegates. That was just announced last week. Thank you.
I'd like to
and just let me note, in terms of the agenda, these issues on concurrence will be up between 1 and 3 in the afternoon. So you don't have to go for the whole day. A lot of the stuff in the morning is educational. And so if you can't go for the whole day, you can still go for part of it if you want to be there to vote one way or the other.
Terrific. I wanted to bring up a couple of questions that came up in the chat, if I may. Towards the beginning of your conversation, Mamie asked, does the proposal permit an authorized representative, like a healthcare power of attorney named in a healthcare directive, to seek the care on behalf of an individual not sound of mind?
No, 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 no.
Yeah, I'd like to know why.
Emphasize that,
I learned later your point. I heard your response.
Yeah.
Because of the unfortunate increase in individuals suffering from dementia, for a very long time. I'm curious about, is that political reasoning? Is it medical reasoning? What's the reasoning when, as a healthcare power of attorney, healthcare directive, you are in fact authorized to make many, many end-of-life decisions for your loved one? Why is this excluded? What was the reasoning for that?
You know, this has developed over the years, and I think there are a couple of factors. A big factor is the fact that we don't have a healthcare system like other states. Our healthcare system is profit-driven. And I think there are concerns about the fact that it's a profit-driven healthcare system that could influence people's decision-making. That's why it's so strictly limited to only people who can make their own decisions. I just think that's a truth, and we can argue whether or not that's the case, but I think that's part of why. There's also a feeling, I think there were a lot of people in the disability community and others who felt that that would give too much power to people to act discriminating against them, which is why we put so many safeguards in the bill, and you know, it has to be limited only to people who can do this for themselves. So they're really safeguards to protect people who felt they could be taken advantage of. And so they can't be under this because it's only for people who can act for themselves.
Yeah, I appreciate that. If I could just follow up briefly. This first one is thinking out loud. 2 comments. So thinking about the way it's worded, if I, God forbid, you know, I've been diagnosed with dementia, but I'm still of sound mind, I probably will not be able to take advantage of that because there's the 6-month requirement. So really, for a horrible, highly prevalent disease, this won't be helpful, right? If I'm tracking it, because of the 2 obstacles you mentioned. Healthcare power of attorney can't act, and it has to be within 6 months, which if you have dementia, that probably isn't going to work.
That's right. And for dementia, there's a different approach to dementia, which is to make a very specific dementia healthcare directive. And the option that you have is to voluntarily stop eating and drinking.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, thank you. And just in terms of the thinking out loud processing, I went through this with my mother. And so it's an issue that is, you know, I certainly struggled with. And the idea,
Yeah.
and I guess I can understand the difference between having to make a decision to not take on care for your loved one, you know, who has dementia and is, you know, at end of life, versus acting. You know, it's either the, you know, affirmative action versus the failure to take action. And I can understand how, you know, how that might be different, and the risks involved might be different. So thank you. And excellent presentation.
And with dementia, it's extremely complex.
Yeah, I know, I lived it. Yeah, with my mother. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was the person having to make all the decisions, so I understand. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Along with many other people, you know, that's unfortunate, a reality for many people. Yeah.
How long did your mother live with dementia?
For quite a long time, but only terribly for about 2 years. Yeah.
Oh, that's a long time to live terribly. I'm sorry.
So another question that came up was from Susan, you have to be a resident of Minnesota. How long do you have to be a resident?
There's not, I think it's stipulated that you have to have some proof of residence. So there's not a time. You just have to show that you live there. You have an address, a driver's license, a voter ID card, something like that.
Something like that. Okay. And then what's the racial profile of the total state of Oregon in 2020? Do we know why only 96% were white elected?
We don't, but it's mostly white. I mean, Oregon is kind of like Minnesota, really predominantly white. So I don't know the specific numbers, but vast majority white.
Susan, does that answer your question? Yeah. Any other, would anyone like to unmute and ask a question or pose a comment?
I have one more. I'll let Mary go.
Oh, thank you. I'm just thinking a lot about people that are not privileged and middle class. And so I'm thinking of people who may not have health insurance, or if they do, it's Medicaid, which is not going to cover this. Do you have an approximate cost for someone in that situation, someone who doesn't have health care that covers it, is aware that this is a possibility, So has to find a physician that'll do it, or I'm assuming tell the patient that he or she is ready for hospice, and then the prescription, approximately a ballpark figure.
Well, the prescription is about $500. And the cost of two, clinical appointments, I don't know what that would be. So it's really hard to guess.
Thank you.
$2,500 is just a rough guess or more.
Thank you.
So we're not just excluding people with dementia, but people that are, as you said, not privileged with, and how could we kind of address that? I mean, if it's a person of color, say, that doesn't have insurance and that sort of thing, they're kind of being discriminated against. Maybe not willingly, but it happens.
The way to change that would be, there are two ways. One would be to have the state portion of Medicaid cover it. That's what Oregon and Colorado do. And the other thing is something we are working on, our Compassion and Choices is working on, which is to get rid of the prohibition against funding for medical aid in dying. So it was so that Medicare and others could actually cover the cost. That's a longer term thing. That's going to take a long time. Well, it depends on who's, anyway. But in the short term, the state could make the choice to do that if they wanted to.
Thank you. Mamie, I'm sorry I stepped in front of you, but
Oh, no problem. And this may have been in the slide, so sorry if I didn't absorb it the first time. But what has happened in the Minnesota legislature? I understand the league hasn't, concurred or voted to support it. You mentioned a couple of people who've been carrying the bill. What is the likelihood of it getting through at any point?
Well, it was first introduced in 2015. It had an informational hearing in 2015 and in 2016 in the Healthcare Committee. And there actually were a number of listening sessions around the state in 2016. And then you remember the 2016 elections. Nothing happened for the next 2 years. The bill was introduced, but it didn't move anywhere. And then after the 2018 election, we did get a hearing in the House Health Committee. However, none of those committees have ever taken a vote. And in part, that's because there's lots of education that has to happen. So I would say, even though this has been around for 6 years, we're really at the very beginning of trying to educate people and lawmakers, and also raise the, I don't want to say urgency, but maybe priority. I think that there are so many very loud, important priorities out there that this can often get overshadowed. So a big part of the potential future of this is if more and more people start to talk about it, and talking about it with candidates, lawmakers, neighbors, if you live in a residence, senior residence, that kind of thing. So it's going to be a grassroots groundswell. So how long will that take? I don't know. Things can happen very quickly, and sometimes it takes, but we've been laying the groundwork now for quite a while. So hopefully we'll hit a tipping point.
Great. Susan.
I'm taking Maine as an example. They passed the law finally, and then but it was finally after about 10 years of having it on the state legislature. And you can force a vote in Maine by citizens signing a petition. And they did a massive petition drive, and they took it for a vote, and they voted for it. So it's more of a matter of, you make the legislature listen to you, and then you pass it. So that's what they did in Maine. I'm just telling you, it's an example.
Joni and then Arnie.
So Senator Eaton is one of the many women who have announced their retirements from the state legislature. Is there someone else who will be carrying this effort forward if it is something that does not pass during this session?
You know, we have plenty of senators out there who were co-sponsors. Any one of them might do that. I have my favorite, but I'm going to wait till after the election and see who gets in. I would love to see it be somebody who has healthcare experience, either a doctor or a nurse. I think that adds credibility to it. So I think we just have to kind of wait and see how the elections play out. But there's no doubt in my mind that we will have a very supportive champion author in the future.
Arnie.
You know, being married to a retired photojournalist, international photojournalist, I'm really impressed with how much access we have to the press. And I just wonder if we've engaged at all in that, and you know, the letters to the editor and editorials that really can get a quarter page or a half page in a publication like the Star Trib, and other resources, and especially in smaller communities. I mean, Edina has a community newspaper, and I think this is something that could be a good insert there. So it would take a lot of participation, I think, by many of us to have that happen, but some well-crafted information would be really, I think, beneficial to get the general public aware and make that a little more important when people who are elected start hearing about that from their constituents around the state.
You know, I would add that if the league does take a position in April, what it will allow the league to do is then ask these questions of candidates. And frankly, candidates are listening. Candidates care more about what we think than the electeds do. So that's an opportunity for the league to build this question in, and they're like, oh, the league's asking about this, it must be important. So that's kind of one way to elevate it, just by asking about it.
Mimi.
And one more question. You must have had a lot of coffee this morning, but do you know what is AARP's position? Speaking of a powerful lobby, on behalf of older people.
They have no position.
Will they have there been opportunities to, try to partner with them, or is that a political reason on their part, or do you know what's behind the no position?
I believe that they think that it is too divisive.
Okay. I got it.
And I have to say, pretty much it's divisive in that probably 65 to 70% of people support it, but the 25% who don't are very loud. So it's kind of like similar to what happens with gun legislation, which is everybody wants background checks, but 10% of the loud rule the outcome. And so this is kind of similar. Our opponents are the same groups that oppose abortion and LGBTQ health. So it's religious groups primarily.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, thank you. Loud, organized, and willing to work is what they are.
Can I ask a question?
They meet in large groups every Sunday morning.
Can you hear me? Can I ask a question?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
It was my understanding, as I said, I've been a league member for a while, Minneapolis quite a while, but it's my understanding, because I've not been involved, that the league at the state level did not support this issue, that there weren't enough chapters in the state of Minnesota that supported it. And so it is not a league position that was taken a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I did mention that. Maybe I didn't make that clear. It came up at the convention last year.
Right. Okay.
And it got 58% of the vote, but did not get 60% of the vote, which was the threshold to adopt the position. And this committee came together afterwards saying, we think it's because people didn't know enough about it. So we set about educating for a year, and then it will come back this year.
It's unbelievable people didn't know about it. So 50, that's not very good. The 58%, it needed 60, is that right? And,
Yeah.
and I was told that the
Correct.
outside leagues who didn't vote for it were saying, well, we are in support of it, but the people we represent us in our county are not supporting it, therefore we are not supporting. Is that at all accurate?
Go, Susan.
I feel that the people that said they were not supporting it, those were the people who said, we need to focus on the election. They didn't say anything about what they thought their members wanted.
Huh, that's interesting, because that is not what I heard of active Roseville.
I did hear some say that they're worried that this is, that will be seen as too liberal, and we already have positions
Yeah.
like guns and climate change, and we're already seen as so liberal. Why are we, that they were concerned about the political impact. And I just went back to, we don't typically consider whether it's a Democratic or a Republican issue when we look at issues. So who is the league becomes the question. Is that what we do? Do we modify our position based on the politics of the time, or do we look at the issues and make decisions based on our assessment of whether they should be or should not be supported? That was kind of part of the debate.
And it was a matter of resources. I mean, in 2020, we were facing a big drive for the election, and most of the leagues were concerned about that.
Colleen, you were going to make.
Yeah, I would just like to add to, I appreciate your idea of putting a question in the candidate forums and talking with the candidates. I think to what Arnie said, to get something, let's say post-April, and this gets passed, put something in the local newspaper, it's called the Sun Current, and maybe in the Star Tribune as well, but get some information out there so that the community knows what this means. Because, a lot of people are still probably thinking, oh, yeah, it's assisted suicide with another name, but to get that information, so when it comes up at the candidate forums, if it comes up at the candidate forums, or we bring it up at the candidate forums, they're not, oh, what are they talking about assisted suicide for? So I think that would be something that we need to kind of proceed along to inform the community. And, I love the idea of putting it in the candidate forum questions. I think that's a good idea. So thank you.
And another question came up from Patty Ann. If Medicare covers hospice, why wouldn't it cover this end of life effort?
Because there's a very explicit law that says no federal money can be spent on assisted suicide.
Federal law. Okay. And Arnie?
I think when I think about who's really a good person to talk about this, credibility, Rebecca, you're it. And you've really done a great job. But I also wonder if there are any medical organizations in the state that are supportive. Family physicians, Minnesota Medical, professional nurses, whatever. Do we have any indication of what their groups as a group might endorse or
most of the
support?
medical groups, including the the Medical Association and the Nurses Association, are neutral, and the Hospice Association, because they don't want to say they're for it or against it. And they have, of their own members, differences of opinion. So rather than choose one side, they remain neutral. And they still will lobby for, aspects of it that they're concerned about, but yeah.
Joni?
Thank you.
Just for clarity, not for the sake of argument, but I would say that League already modifies its positions, or at least chooses what it advocates most actively for and does not advocate very visibly or actively on, depending on the times. And I'm thinking specifically of reproductive rights. I know that League has had a position for a very long time, but I don't think it's real visible on that issue. You can find it but you have to search for it. And Connie, you may correct my understanding of this, but I've been told by others that the League at Edina had a membership that was well over 300 in the 60s and moving into the 70s, and that part of the decline in membership was due to Roe v. Wade and the League taking a position on reproductive rights, and that caused a rift in League or a drop off in membership similar to that experienced by some of the political parties. So I stand or sit to be corrected, but that's what I had been told.
So you're talking about a position that we had in 1960 through 1975 or so?
No, we still have the position. You just don't see the League, and the League is involved in coalitions nationwide. For instance, the Women Winning Coalition in Minnesota that works on, and also the Women Candidate Development Coalition, which is a nonprofit, that's nonpartisan, supports women candidate, pro-choice women candidates. Or seeks them, trains them. So that's a nonprofit, that's nonpartisan. Women Winning is partisan in that it supports and advocates on the funds, candidates, but also pro-choice. And so League is affiliated with formally and works with those organizations, but it's not something that I think you see very often. And in fact, I recall that the League in Minnesota, was it 6 years ago or 8 years ago, very deliberately, it was when I think we got our new executive director, but there was a pulling back, and local leagues were told that there was going to be a focus on election issues, and that would be their job, is to mostly focus on election issues. So that's, again, I'm not saying this by way of argument, but putting this forward that in fact it's not uncommon or not unknown for League to emphasize or work very visibly, actively on some positions and not on others due to politics of the times. And again, I turn to Connie for her thoughts on her memories of what happened and whether or not what I've been told about Edina League is accurate.
And Connie has her hand up. Go ahead, Connie.
Well, I just wanted to say it's a long time ago and I'm not real sure myself, but I know I was on the board, the Edina League board at the time, and I know one board member quit because of that position. And she was also a member of one of the Catholic churches in Edina. So I'm sure it was because of the position. Well, she stated that. Now, as to a decline of membership, we don't have exit interviews of why they don't participate or why they haven't renewed their membership. So I don't know if we could say one thing or another. It's usually a variety of things that do make people not renew membership. They're too busy, or they would say, if we did ask, they would not probably say it was over that issue unless they want to be very vocal about it. That's what my memories are.
Thank you, Connie and Joni both for bringing that up.
Other thoughts, other questions, other comments?
Do you
Well-
all have the materials, Julie, that or Susan, the study and the addendum? Okay, you have all that. Okay.
When we sent out the information, we did provide some links to that data. And I think it's also on our website, and we'll continue to keep it on the website.
Yes, and it will be under past events. That's where the information will be, it's under the past events is where that will show up once this is over. And we will put a summary of this in our April newsletter. Kathy Sello was here and I was taking some notes after she had to leave. So we'll have notes about that, and we'll also highlight that in the newsletter. You can put the link in the newsletter, which we send out electronically, so that people will be able to see it again. And it has been on the three thing, it's been out a lot, so.
Mhm.
And I see,
Maggie has her hand up, yes.
Yes, hi, quick question. Back to the discussion on can we get some publicity or some articles, educational along the lines of public service announcements. Can we actually do that as a league? Or will that make us sound too liberal? I mean, I'm not sure how to achieve an educational publicity campaign with either the local Sun Current or wherever without saying who we are and without sounding too liberal. I'm trying to be, I'm thinking along the lines of this should be a nonpartisan / bipartisan issue, and we want to educate the public, but how do we do that without turning some people off? I guess I'm wondering that in my mind, if anybody wants to give more input.
It
Thank
looks
you.
like Susan has her hand up. Susan.
Yeah, it's sort of, Maggie, it's sort of an issue that we want to let the League of State of Minnesota deal with the issue, and then we will take a position as local boards. Is that right, Colleen?
I didn't expect it to come to me. Okay, so the League of Minnesota, if they take a position, then we can advocate for that.
Mhm.
So the answer is yes, we could. And I think that to your point, Maggie, just educating about this, to educate the community about something that is in the legislature that might be of interest to people in the community. And we could, as the League of Women Voters of Edina, we could inform them with the information that Rebecca shared with us. And yes, some people would not be happy about it, but I will guarantee you there are some people that aren't happy about racial justice either. So, I mean, we're not gonna have everybody agreeing with positions, whether it's climate change or anything else that we have. So yes. And Rebecca, do you want to add anything to that?
Just to remind people that we know that the vast majority of people support it. So it is a nonpartisan issue among the people.
Arnie.
Yeah, I guess the thing I would say is that, anyone can write a letter to the editor. Anyone can submit information for publication in the newspapers. So I don't think, if I were to be doing that, I wouldn't reference the League of Women Voters. I would just say this is an issue that's out there, and people are considering it. And other states have this enacted, and it seems like it's a reasonable idea. I don't think it needs the identification with an organization.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Connie.
Yet.
I think we have to wait till we have a position before we can make, I think, educational comments about it, because, or else only Colleen can speak for the league in the Edina paper. And I think, Colleen, you would probably want to have some backing on that, like maybe the board said before we have a position, the board directed you to do it, or something. If we don't have the members of our organization behind us on some kind of, it's not a position yet, so we can't say we voted on it. And that's what I think the problem would be, to have Colleen write a letter to the editor with the League of Edina on as the I think, I'm not sure.
Well, I think
No, you're right, Connie. I don't think any individual league can write a letter of support for anything that the state league doesn't have a position on,
Correct.
unless it's
That's-
a local issue. If it's a local issue, yes, but if it's a statewide issue, we can't get out in front of the state league. So there's nothing we can do, any individual group, unless and until we adopt the position. And that's really what your action is are you going to support adopting the position on April 30th?
Right, exactly. But if the state league adopts it, then we can advocate for it as a League of Women Voters Edina. If the
Right.
US does it,
Right.
and we can choose not to as well. But if the US has a position and we don't have one particular just to Edina, we can still advocate for that US position or that Minnesota position. And we can also advocate for our own positions that we have. We don't have to have it approved by LWVE. Is my understanding. Mhm.
Well, I think the fact that we are having a program on it is the first step, because we are becoming educated. So we will be able to participate on that April 30th council and have that continue to have conversation about this very important issue. Any final questions before Colleen wraps us up? Joni.
So I do have a question about, Dr. Thoman, you've referred several times opposition from faith-based groups, and I have been working in politics since 1972. So I'm familiar with a lot of, in rural areas, so familiar with a lot of this. Has there been outreach to faith-based groups? Because they're not monolithic. There's not a unanimity among faith-based groups, and there are different positions held by different denominations, different faiths. Has there been outreach and educational efforts in those circles as there has been to different medical bodies?
Yes, actually, in Minnesota, there's a small interfaith clergy for end-of-life options group, and they have representatives from, I think, 6 different denominations, as well as Reformed Jew. And we have been reaching out, they have been reaching out to churches. In fact, there's a presentation coming up at an Edina church. I'm going to see if I can find that. And I would say the Unitarian, the UCC, some of the Methodist churches and the ELCA churches have, and some of the Presbyterian churches have done presentations and have representation of supportive clergy members. They may not, as a denomination, have a position, but we've been kind of education through those. Okay, St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in Edina is having a presentation on this on May 1st, the day after, council.
And one of our members is, maybe more than one, but one of our members is a very active member there. So yeah, I will make sure that she's aware of that.
Just a quick question. Are you available for presentations to any large groups when there are on Sunday mornings adult education programs at churches? I go to Westminster Presbyterian downtown.
Yes, we've been trying to get into Westminster Presbyterian, and actually one of your ministers, she's not a minister there, but do you know Margaret McCrae?
I know the name. I'm not familiar with her.
Yeah, she was on the. She's been a member of the interfaith clergy group. So yes, absolutely. And we also have I can give you the link to the website where you can read about the clergy group and see some of the videos of presentations and stuff. Yeah,
that would be great.
I was rather surprised at when you displayed the religions and how they viewed this positively or negatively. I was surprised that Catholic, if I recall from what you presented, Catholics were more positive to it than general Christians. And that may have been, or I didn't expect that. I would have expected the reverse more likely. So that, your point about reaching out to the various denominations makes a lot of sense. And not just Christian or Jewish, but also others that, you know, that are represented in Minnesota. Well, it's about 15. Oh, Maggie has a comment, I think.
I'll make this real quick. I just pulled out my old file and mentioning Westminster Town Hall Forum. There was an excellent presentation by Jean Robinson back in October of 2016 regarding choices and the end of life. And I attended that. It was an excellent town hall forum by Westminster Presbyterian downtown. They bring in some great speakers, and they did a wonderful job. And so if ever we are looking for more speakers, in addition to Dr. Rebecca, who did a wonderful presentation today, thank you. Gene Robinson, I would add his name to the list. Just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
You can actually see, actually it was the Interfaith Clergy Group that brought him, and you can see the presentation on that website that we have. And then Barbara Coombs-Lee spoke at the Westminster Town Hall Forum last year on end-of-life options. I think it was in March. You can also probably find them on the Westminster Town Hall Forum site, but yeah. So yeah, they've taken on this issue at the Town Hall Forum, but not as a church entity.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you.
Rebecca, is there a website that you want to put into the chat so folk can go to it right now?
Sure, let me look that up real quick.
Maggie,
And while she's doing that, let me just say that a week from today at 7 p.m., we are having a presentation on changes in assisted living regulations. So, you know, this is something that we'll be presenting. I don't have the speakers right in front of me, but I know that Mamie Siegel, who is here, is one of the people that worked on it. And so that will be 7 o'clock on Zoom. We invite you to attend to hear more about some of the changes that are coming about in assisted living. And Maggie, did you have a comment?
Yes, I just wanted to add, tonight, there is another Zoom. It's sponsored by Compassion and Choices Group, and I believe it is Dr. Barbara Coombs-Lee speaking, and that's tonight from 4:30 to 6 o'clock. Just wanted to mention that if anybody wants to jump on that, I think you can go to the Compassion and Choices website. So FYI, thank you.
Thank you. And is that in the chat? Not that one, but Rebecca, did you get something in the chat? I don't see it yet. Or did you want to share with us a website? Oh, there it is. I see it now. Thank you. Thank you. Compassion and Choices. Thank you. So everyone, we appreciate your attending, your thoughtful questions, and hopefully you learned something. And I don't know if anybody has anything else to say. If not, I think we'll sign off a little bit early.
Thank you all for having me.
Thanks.
So
For
much.
talking about this issue.
Great.
We'll
It
we'll
was
see your delegates on the 30th.
That's right. Thank you so much, everyone.